Welcome back, everyone. This is video lecture day 2 this week. As a reminder, your video lecture notes today are due 4 points. Yesterday was a bonus situation. Today, those are due for points as well as your quiz, but we will go over those things at the end. Our next topic that we're going to be focusing on is stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination. And this is sometimes referred to as intergroup bias because stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination are 3 of the components of intergroup bias. So before we start to talk about this material, it's important to say that these issues can be really challenging, it can be uncomfortable, and we all have different perspectives, including personal experience that could be relevant or not relevant for people. So these issues that we're going to talk about are not going to impact everyone equally. But what I want you to take from this is that we're going to take it seriously. I'm going to show you what the research tells us and then what the field of psychology has to say about intergroup bias. But I'm also aware that you may bring your own experiences into this classroom. But I'm open to your feedback. If you think I cover something in a way that's unfair or not as sensitive as it could be, shoot me an email and I'm welcome to that feedback and appreciate it, even if it's critical. So we're always learning and happy to do so. So that's just a little spiel before we get into this topic. So research on stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination really began after World War II or after the 1940s. The war was fueled to a large extent by racism and intergroup hatred. In the civil rights era, people again focused extensively on stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination. This research area is still growing. There were only a few papers about prejudice since 1994, but it's steadily increasing. And in 2017, there were over 1,800 papers. Video notes question number 1. Why do you think social psychologists became increasingly interested in studying prejudice and discrimination after World War II and the Civil Rights Movement? So I told you a little bit about what was going on, but why do you think this was interesting or would have been of interest to social psychologists? Let's start by differentiating the term stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination. We defined stereotype earlier in the semester when we talked about applied social cognition. But again, stereotypes are beliefs about the characteristics of a particular group of people. I use another definition too. Remember, a stereotype could be a generalization about a group of people in which certain traits are virtually assigned to all members of the group, regardless of actual variation among the group members. We're in New York and we are kind of stereotyped to be intellectuals. Notice that not all stereotypes are negative. In many cases, they're beliefs about how a person is that can be neutral or positive, but we still have a lot of negative consequences. So a lot of these graphs that you are going to see on the next couple of slides, or these maps of the US, are from this article, 12 Ways to Break the US, the Atlas of Prejudice. This next one is showing microwaves, the barbecue belt, and then the deep fried South as far as how people split characteristics. We have carnivores and vegans. And then we also have racist in denial on the top half and heartfelt racist. We'll actually come back to this a little bit later because there is a distinction between heartfelt racist. So this would be considered the people who are prejudiced and they hold these stereotypes and they truly buy into it. And then the racist in denial, who would be the people that don't buy into the stereotypes and don't want to be prejudiced but still may hold implicit biases. However, the idea that we can place these groups so easily on a map is a stereotype and is certainly false. Now talking about prejudice, this is a feelings or an affective component. Prejudice is typically unfavorable feelings about a group of people, and some textbooks even define prejudice as unfavorable attitudes, but there's some disagreement. Prejudice can be positive. Maybe you have a positive feeling about working moms. You might think, oh, that's Superwoman. You can have a positive prejudice attitude, but typically we do think of prejudice as negative. And for discrimination, this is something that's behavioral. What's critical is that this negative behavior is about people like you, not something particular about you, something about your group. So you can see the differences and commonalities across the terms, and they all have to do with your group membership. Stereotype is about the belief, so the thoughts and expectations that you have about the group. Prejudice is for feelings and affect. This might come from the specific beliefs, but you have specific feelings about the group. And then discrimination is the behavior. It might result from either the stereotyping or the prejudice or both. Discrimination is observable behavior. It's much harder to measure stereotypes and prejudice. Starting with stereotypes, what stereotypes do people hold and what is the content of their stereotypes? I introduced this big 2 dimensions in the social cognition and attitude section of the course, but we tend to stereotype people in the same ways we tend to perceive them. These fundamental dimensions of social judgment. Warmth would be, is this person a friend or foe? Are they warm, moral, trustworthy, or friendly? Competence would ask, are they able to act on their intentions to help or harm? Are they competent, skilled, agentic, assertive, and dominant? We could perceive this about individual people, but when we perceive it about a group, it becomes a stereotype. We can think about our stereotypes toward animal species first, just to get a handle on how the stereotype content model works. In this case, competent means skilled, intelligent. Warm means friendly or well-intentional. What do you think? What are some stereotypes that you have about these animals? So my own stereotypes would be on display here, that dogs and cats are the best, most warm, most competent. Cats are capable but not as trustworthy or friendly. And then we can see these other things here with rat being the least friendly and the least intelligent, and moving up. When researchers asked more people, not just me, they found these groupings. So just as examples, it's not necessarily important to know these, but dogs and cats are the best, most warm, and competent. We see hamsters, ducks, and rabbits as warm, but not particularly competent. We see tigers and lions and leopards and bears as competent, but not particularly warm, which is smart. And then we see lizards and snakes and rats as just nasty and not warm or competent. These are all fun and games until we start to look at how we view people, though. And of course, these stereotypes are also going to apply to groups of people. So this is from a sample of adult Americans using self-report measures when people rate the group's competence and warmth on 5-point scales, showing the warmth and competence ratings of different groups. For the high competence and high warmth group, we see housewives, Christians, Black progressionals, Irish, middle class. High competence and low warmth would be rich people, Asians, Jewish people, white people, and British people. Low competence and high warmth, disabled, and the elderly. And then low competence and low warmth would be people that receive welfare, poor homeless people, poor Black people, feminists. On the website, you can see the maps for many different countries, so you can see their specific stereotypes and how they view people more relevant in that culture. This is a sample of Europeans, showing how different European nations view one another and how they view themselves. Across many countries, we basically see this trend that the people that are going to be highest in competence and warmth are going to be citizens, middle class, the dominant regionalist. So this is your everyday person. High in competence, low in warmth is going to be your rich professional technical experts. And then high in warmth and low in competence, elderly, disabled, or children. And then low in both would be poor people, homeless people, or immigrants. These beliefs, though, can lead to feelings or emotions that are evoked. In other words, stereotypes can lead to prejudice. For groups we see as low in competence and warmth, we are going to experience disgust and contempt. For groups we see as low in competence but high in warmth, we're going to experience pity and sympathy. For groups we see as high in competence but low in warmth, we're going to experience envy and jealousy. And then for groups that we see as high in competence and high in warmth, we experience pride and admiration. And of course, these feelings can motivate discriminatory behaviors and policies. Video notes question number 2. Choose one emotion: envy, pity, admiration, or contempt. Describe how feelings about warmth and competence might produce that emotional reaction. As an interesting side note, people even have these stereotypes and specific emotional reactions to brands as well. So you could look and see Goldman Sachs here, Public Transport and Amtrak versus Johnson & Johnson and Rolls-Royce and Mercedes. So we can also see how that could overlap on potential stereotypes, specific personality traits too that we talked about as well. Now that I've defined what stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination are and told you a little bit about the content of stereotypes and how that can relate to feelings towards groups, we're gonna switch into the assessment or looking at how we understand these things through our research. When we talk about measuring intergroup bias, people are typically talking about measuring prejudice or the feelings and attitudes towards groups. You can measure stereotype content and how much people endorse those beliefs, but it's less common. Discrimination is measured behaviorally, like with hate crime stats, bias in hiring decision, and police violence statistics. So it's typically feelings and prejudice, and we can assess prejudice with self-report measures and implicit measures. You've probably heard the term implicit bias, which is basically prejudice that is measured implicitly rather than self-reported. Self-report measures assess explicit attitudes, the attitudes that are part of your awareness or your controlled thinking. When we're talking about social cognition, we talked about how we engage in both controlled and automatic thinking. So self-report measures are assessing your controlled thinking, the biases that you are aware of. Here's an example measure that gets at an explicit preference. I like white people and black people equally versus statements that indicate a stronger positive feeling towards one of the groups. Another self-report example to measure prejudice is this type of measure called a feeling thermometer. How warm or cold do you feel towards a certain group? So a question could look like, how warm or cold do you feel towards white people? How warm or cold do you feel towards black people? And on the scale, extremely cold to extremely warm. Those examples were both related to race, but you can also assess attitudes towards other groups such as sexual minorities. This is the sexual prejudice scale with items like gay men are immoral, or I'd feel comfortable at a wedding for 2 gay men, or lastly, retirement benefits should not include the partners of gay men. So those 2 items would have been reverse coded. Measuring modern prejudice with the modern racism scale. With modern racism, it's still racism, but it's more masked. So I'm going to show you some of these items and then I'm going to explain modern racism in more detail. So this first item is assessing the denial of continuing discrimination. The second item assesses antagonism toward black people's demands. And then the third item assesses resentment towards what is seen as special favors. The idea of the modern racism scale is that most people don't express overt prejudice towards groups anymore. It's considered inappropriate socially to believe or endorse the prejudice statements that we saw before. No one really wants to be called a racist. That has very bad consequences in our world today. But modern racism is more subtle. Modern racists might not say that they believe black people are morally inferior to white people, but they do feel animosity toward African Americans or black people, or feel suspicious of them and uncomfortable dealing with them. That's because modern racists believe that A, discrimination towards black people is largely a thing of the past. B, black people's struggles stem from their unwillingness to work hard rather than something else systemic. C, black people are making too many demands and want results too fast. And D, what black people get outweighs what they deserve. These ideas are still racist, but they're more subtle and they're based on these justifications that we believe that we have. Again, they're still racist, but it's more of a modern way. We saw that some of the items were reverse coded. Video notes question number 3 is asking you, why do you think researchers often include reverse scored items on attitude questionnaires? So we could also look at this in regards to sexism. This is the modern sexism scale with items like discrimination against women is no longer a significant issue in our society. And it's easy to understand the anger of women's groups in America, so that would be another reverse coded item. Video notes question number 4 is asking what is one advantage and one limitation of using self-report questionnaires to measure prejudice. So self-report measures assess explicit attitudes, but we also may want to assess implicit attitudes. The ones that are outside of our awareness, the ones that are our automatic thinking. These are the associations that you hold in your mind. When you think of a social group, these are the feelings and beliefs that are automatically activated by the implicit attitudes that you hold. So the IAT is an implicit measure that measures the strength and associations between concepts, like Black people and gay people, and evaluations, good or bad, or stereotypes, like athletic and clumsy. It's measuring the relative strength of these associations. If people hold stronger associations between Black and bad than between white and good, that's implicit prejudice. You could also use the stereotypes by assessing the association with particular attributes as well. So are you more likely to see Black people as athletic and white people as clumsy, and vice versa? So we are now going to walk through an example and talk through what this would look like. So in part 1, you see images or words and you're just categorizing as quickly as you can. You're using your keyboard to do this. African American, so I would click E as fast as I could. E is for left, I is for right. You're just sorting these images. Sorting as quickly as possible because remember that reaction time is the primary outcome of interest. I see a European American here, so I would click I for right. Part 2 is about sorting evaluation words. Hatred is a bad word, so I would click I for right. Remember, as fast as I can because this is about reaction times. Terrific, this is pretty easy, that's good, so I'm gonna hit E for good. Step 3 is where it starts to get a little trickier. We're gonna be sorting each face and word at the same time. Is African American good or is European American bad? But in this case, we would be clicking right because it's European American. Same thing here, we'd be clicking right because it's bad. This is showing us that we do know the concepts and we do know where things are associated. Then they switch the locations of concepts for a little reset. This is easier again, but now our things are on the other side. So we have African American on the right and European American on the left. We use the new setup, get used to it for a while. We do the same things with words. And then like before, you're evaluating 2 categories at once, but they're combined in an opposite way. Now African American and bad are together and European American and good are together. But here we would hit E because terrific is still good. And then here we would also hit E because it's still European American. At step 3 and 4, there are 2 different versions of pairing during the tasks that are being compared. The idea is that one pairing is stereotypical and the other isn't. If someone has internalized this stereotype or made the pairing in their mind, then it should be easy or fast to sort this stereotypical pairing. If I hold the stereotype that European Americans are good and African Americans are bad, then it's just 2 categories in my mind. The good stuff, including European Americans, and the bad stuff, including African Americans. If I learn that European is good, then I just learn to always go to the left. That's going to make this very easy to do and I'll be very fast. And if I hold this stereotype, it will be harder to complete this one because it will take longer because I will see a Caucasian face, I'll think European American, but I also might automatically think good, and it's hard to select this category with bad. There's interference. When I see the good, I'm going to want to sort it to the same place that I saw European American. In other words, if you hold this stereotype, you'll be faster when you're in this part of the assessment with the green pairing than with the red pairing. And it'll take you longer and you'll make more mistakes when you're in the red pairing. Another way to think about this is that they are trying to see what constructs are already linked in your mind. Is European good and African American bad already linked in your mind? Or is African American good and European American bad already linked in your mind? Next video notes question is, why does the IAT focus on reaction time instead of asking people directly about their beliefs? Assuming you have an implicit bias against gay people, which pairing would lead to the fastest reaction time? So negative prejudice against gay people, you would have a stronger association between straight and good than gay and good. When you would try to classify using this B model, you might experience some interference because you'll say, yeah, that's a gay person, but that's not a good person. Oh, that's going to take me a second. So that is the experience of interference. This might make a little bit more sense for you after you try it. And I'll be sure to put this on the exam review so we can go over it again after you've tried it also. IIT scores and self-reported bias measures are positively correlated. If someone has higher explicit bias or higher self-reported prejudice, they will also show higher implicit bias on the IIT, but they're not the same thing. People demonstrate stronger bias on the IIT than on self-report measures, likely because they don't want to hold these assumptions. They might not even believe them. They might not consciously believe that black is bad and white is good, but implicitly those associations are stronger in their brains and they can have important implications. Next video notes question is, why might someone's explicit attitudes differ from their implicit attitudes? IAT frequently asked questions. Do black participants show a preference for black people over white people on the race attitude IAT? Do gay participants show a preference for gay over straight? Do older participants show a preference for old over young? So I'll answer this personally before I give you the answer. And obviously I am just one person, but according to the IAT, and I believe the last time I took one was a year ago, and it's been the same ever since I take it. But according to the IAT, I have the strongest preference for older white men. So there we go. Even though I'm one person, it's obviously the opposite of both of the categories that I would, or even more than that, any category that I have about myself, it feels like the opposite. However, that is what the IAT would say I have the strongest preference for. So results from this website consistently show that members of stigmatized groups like black people and gay people tend to have more positive implicit attitudes towards their group than people who are not in their group, but there's still a moderate preference for the more socially valued group. And we think a lot of that is because stigmatized group members can develop negative associations about their own group from their cultural environments, but also have some positive association because of their own group membership and that of close others. Both black and white people tend to have implicit attitudes that suggest a preference for whites over blacks. You can see this figure here. But that preference for white people is stronger among white people than it is for black people. And this is all about implicit attitudes. On the right side of the figure, we can see what happens with explicit or self-report attitudes. There, black people show an explicit preference for black people and white people show an explicit preference for white people. Women and men also have greater stereotypes, linking male with career and female with family, somewhat stronger in implicit than explicit, at least for women respondents. Another FAQ question, where do implicit attitudes come from? Is it me or is it my culture? Implicit attitude preferences for majority groups, so white people in our case would be the majority group, are likely common because of strong negative associations with black people in American society. There is a long history of racial discrimination in the United States, and black people are often portrayed negatively in culture and mass media. However, even if our attitudes and beliefs come from our culture, they are still in our own mind. Subtle psychological biases of all shapes can influence our behavior if we are not vigilant to their influence. Think about this like pickles. You take a cucumber and you put it in the brine. And the brine would be all of the things that the world is teaching us, all of the media that we see, and all of the history that came before us. And then when you take that cucumber out, it is a pickle. The result is that we have these implicit associations that are prejudice. It's not our fault, but it's our responsibility. We put this cucumber in the brine, so now we got to eat the pickles. We got to figure it out. Another implicit measure approach that assesses strengths and associations with positively and negatively valenced words. And here we can test whether an image or prime depicting a particular group speeds up or slows down the recognition of words. In this example, someone with negative associations about black people would be faster to recognize dangerous as a real word than they would be to recognize a positive word such as generous after seeing a Black person's face. Because as soon as you see the face, you automatically activate all of the associations that you have with that group. It makes it easier to recognize words that are consistent with your schema. That is all we have for today's content. I'd like to challenge you to consistently think about these things. Sometimes for a lot of people, this is our first time hearing about biases or stereotypes or prejudice that we may have, but it's important that once you are aware of these things, you start to actively try to combat it, right? We are responsible for the pickles that we make from cucumbers. Your access code is up here on the screen, and so are the things that are due. We will be meeting in person via Zoom tomorrow, so I will see you guys tomorrow, which is Thursday at 12 p.m. for our class.